Jesse lived alone in the cold mountains. His cabin, made of wood and stone, stood at the edge of the forest. It was far from the busy town where people lived in homes with bright lights and warm fires. Jesse preferred it that way. He didn't need anyone around. He had the forest, the animals, and the peace that came with living away from others. But there was something Jesse didn't have. Something that always troubled him deep inside.
He had tried for years to start a family.
He had imagined being a father, teaching his children how to hunt, how to survive in the wild, and how to care for the land. But it wasn't meant to be. His body had betrayed him, and despite all the effort he had put into finding a solution, he was infertile. He would never have children of his own. That sadness sat with him, hidden deep down, but it was always there. It was in the way his eyes would drift to the children playing in the town when he went for supplies. It was in the way he avoided looking at families, especially those with fathers teaching their sons how to fish or hunt. Every time he saw something like that, it was like a reminder that he would never experience it. Jesse was a strong man. He didn't show his emotions easily. Years of living alone in the mountains had made him tough, and he liked it that way. But on the inside, the loneliness gnawed at him. He didn't mind the quiet. The quiet was good for thinking. But he missed something, someone to share his life with. He needed family, but that wasn't something he could have. One evening, Jesse made his way down the mountain to the town. The cold wind bit at his skin and the snow crunched beneath his boots. The journey was long, and by the time he reached the town, the sun had already set. The warm glow from the windows of the town's shops and houses felt comforting. It was a good place to rest and get supplies. Inside the small general store, Jesse could see a few people standing around, chatting. He stepped inside, the door creaking behind him. The warmth from the stove hit him and he felt his muscles relax. He walked to the counter where Mr. Simmons, the storekeeper, greeted him with a nod. "Evening, Jesse," Mr. Simmons said, his voice raspy. "You look like you've been trekking through a blizzard. You need something to warm you up?" Jesse smiled slightly, tipping his hat. "A bit of coffee would do, and maybe some flour and beans for the cabin. Got any salt?" "Right here," Mr. Simmons said, motioning to the shelves. "I heard something odd today, though. You might want to know about it." Jesse raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "3 orphans," Mr. Simmons said. "They're selling them. Gotta make some money, you know. The poor things don't have anyone left." Jesse's heart sank. He had seen orphans before, kids who had lost their families in the harsh world. The thought of them living alone made his chest tight. But buying them? He couldn't imagine anyone being that cruel. "Selling orphans?" Jesse asked, feeling his voice tighten. "What do you mean?" Mr. Simmons continued. "The townsfolk are offering them up for sale. You know how it goes. Some people might buy them to work on their land or help around their house. Others might just want to take them in. But it's a deal. The money's cheap too. Just $3 for all 3 of them." Jesse felt a surge of anger and sadness at the same time. The idea of buying children, treating them like goods, made him feel sick. But then he thought about his own life. He lived alone. He had no one. He was isolated, and he had always dreamed of having a family to care for. Maybe these children could be that. Maybe he could give them a home. Maybe he could finally have the family he had always wanted. "What are you going to do with them?" Jesse asked, his voice softer. "Not much we can do." Mr. Simmons shrugged. "If no one buys them, they'll end up in the orphanage. It's not a great place for kids. I think they'd be better off in someone's home." Jesse stood there thinking for a moment. The idea of having children around was foreign to him, but there was something in the way Mr. Simmons spoke about them that made him feel it was the right thing to do. It would be a chance to give them a life away from the town, a life where they could be free. Maybe he could teach them the ways of the land. He could be the father they needed, just as much as they could be the children he longed for. Without saying a word, Jesse turned and walked toward the door. Mr. Simmons called after him, but Jesse didn't stop. He knew what he had to do. He had the money. He could buy the children, take them in, and give them a home. He would be their father, and they would be his children. It was a chance to make something right, something that had always been wrong in his life. The snow was falling heavier now, swirling around Jesse as he made his way to the town square. There, he found the 3 orphans standing quietly near the town's fountain. They were small and ragged, their clothes torn from the harsh winter. The oldest of them, a boy named Thomas, looked around cautiously, as though he was afraid someone might take them away at any moment. The other two were much younger, Lily, a girl with brown eyes full of fear, and Samuel, the youngest, who was clinging to his sister's side. Jesse walked up to them, his boots crunching in the snow. The children looked up at him, unsure of what to expect. They had seen many people come and go, but no one had ever shown them any real kindness. They were used to being passed from one place to another like unwanted objects. "I'll take them," Jesse said, his voice steady but kind. The town sheriff, a large man with a thick beard, stepped forward. He had been standing with the children waiting for someone to make a move. $3, the sheriff said gruffly. "That's the price." Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out the money. He placed it in the sheriff's hand, his fingers curling tightly around the coins. As he did, he noticed the way the children looked at him. Their faces were uncertain, unsure of who this man was or why he was willing to pay for them. But in their eyes there was something else, a spark of hope, as though they thought that maybe, just maybe, this man could offer them something they had never known. Jesse turned and motioned for them to follow. The children didn't move at first. They hesitated, unsure of what would happen next. Jesse's heart ached as he looked back at them. He knew they had been through so much and they didn't trust anyone. But he had to be patient. "Come on," Jesse said gently. "You're safe now. I'll take care of you." It wasn't much, but it was all he had to offer. He turned and began walking toward the mountains where his cabin waited. Slowly the children followed him, their small footsteps crunching in the snow behind him. As they walked together, Jesse couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose fill him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something right. He had no idea what the future would hold for him and these children, but he knew one thing for certain: he was going to give them a home. A home filled with care, with love, and with the chance for something better. Jesse led the three children through the thick snow, each step slower than the last as they made their way to his cabin. The wind was biting and the cold seemed to creep into their bones, but Jesse didn't mind. He had walked through this kind of weather many times before. It was part of life in the mountains, a life he had grown used to. What he hadn't gotten used to, though, was the silence of the children. They had barely spoken since he had bought them. The air around them felt heavy, thick with uncertainty and fear. As they reached the edge of the forest, where his cabin stood, Jesse could see the smoke rising from the chimney, signaling that the fire inside was burning. The warmth of the cabin was a welcome sight. The children had been through so much, and the thought of them finding shelter made his heart ache with a kind of longing he hadn't felt in years. The oldest boy, Thomas, was the first to break the silence. His voice was quiet, like he wasn't sure whether he should speak. "Is this your home?" he asked, his eyes glancing around at the snow-covered trees and the darkening sky. Jesse nodded, giving him a small smile. "Yes, this is where I live. It's not much, but it's warm and it'll keep us safe." The boy didn't respond, but Jesse could see the small flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He was probably wondering what kind of man would bring them to such a place, what kind of life they could have here. For the first time since meeting them, Jesse felt like maybe he had done the right thing. Maybe they would come to understand that this wasn't some cruel punishment. This was a chance for them to be safe, for them to have a family. As they reached the cabin, Jesse opened the door and stepped inside. The warmth hit them immediately. The small fire crackled in the hearth and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was a simple life, but it was peaceful. The children stepped inside hesitantly, taking in their new surroundings. They had clearly never seen anything like it before. The rough wooden furniture, the large iron stove, and the shelves stacked with jars of food. None of it seemed familiar to them. Jesse set about preparing a meal, knowing that the children would need time to adjust. He didn't rush them. He had been alone for so long that he wasn't used to having people around, but the thought of having them here, under his roof, was a strange comfort. He would protect them. He would teach them. And maybe, just maybe, they would learn to trust him. As he cooked, he kept glancing at the children. Lily, the youngest girl, was sitting on the rough wooden bench by the fire, her eyes downcast. She hadn't spoken a word since they arrived, and her tiny body seemed so small and fragile against the cabin's large walls. She looked as though she didn't know how to react to the kindness Jesse had shown her. Her eyes had a sadness to them that Jesse could relate to. He could see that she was afraid to hope, afraid to trust. Samuel, the middle child, was standing by the window, looking outside at the snow-covered mountains. His face was hard to read, but Jessie could tell that he was thinking about something, maybe wondering how long they would be here or what would happen next. Thomas, the oldest boy, had sat down at the table, watching Jessie as he worked. His gaze was steady, and for a moment Jessie thought he saw a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. But it was gone so quickly that Jessie wasn't sure if he had imagined it. The meal was simple. Just some stew made with the vegetables he had grown himself and a loaf of fresh bread. Nothing fancy, but it would fill their stomachs, and that was all that mattered. He served the food, and the children took their places around the table. It was a quiet meal, with only the sound of spoons clinking against bowls and the crackling of the fire to break the silence. Jessie watched them eat, noticing how carefully they were handling the food, like they were afraid it might disappear. He couldn't help but feel for them. They had known nothing but hardship and pain. They didn't know that here in this small cabin there was enough for everyone. They didn't know that this was a safe place where no one would hurt them, where they could be free from the cruelty of the world. As the meal ended, Jessie stood up to clear the dishes. It wasn't much, but it was the least he could do for them. He could see that they were still uncertain, still unsure of what this new life would be. But he had patience. He had learned to be patient in the mountains. The land had taught him that. After dinner, Jessie led them to their rooms. There were 2 small rooms, one for him and one for the children. He gave the children the room that had the extra bed, and he made sure they had blankets to keep warm through the night. They didn't say anything as they settled in, but Jessie could see that they were exhausted. He didn't expect them to thank him. He didn't need them to. The most important thing was that they were safe now. The night passed slowly. Jessie lay awake in his bed, listening to the sound of the wind howling outside and the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth. He thought about the children, about what their lives had been like before. He wondered if they would ever feel at home here, if they would ever come to see him as more than a stranger who had bought them. He wanted so badly to be their father, to give them the love and care they deserved. But he knew that it wasn't going to be easy. They had been through too much. They had learned to trust no one. But Jessie wasn't going to give up. He would earn their trust, and in time they would come to see him as the father he wanted to be. The next morning the children woke early, their faces still tired from the night's sleep. But there was something different in the air. The sun was shining through the cabin's small windows, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. Jessie could see that the children were starting to relax. They hadn't run away in the night. They were still there, still in his care. Over the next few days, Jessie worked hard to show the children that they were safe. He spent time teaching them how to chop wood, how to hunt, how to survive in the wilderness. It wasn't easy, but Jessie had patience. He didn't rush them. Slowly they began to open up, one small step at a time. Thomas was the first to speak more, asking questions about the land and the animals. Samuel followed, beginning to help Jessie with small tasks around the cabin. Lily remained quiet, but she had started to smile when Jessie would show her something new. It was a small smile, but it was a start. Jessie's life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. He had always thought that he was meant to live alone in the mountains. But now he wasn't alone anymore. He had a family, even if it wasn't the one he had always dreamed of. And that was enough. Over time, the bond between Jessie and the children grew. They weren't just orphans he had taken in. They were his family. They had become the children he had always wanted. And Jessie had become the father they had never had. The mountains, once cold and lonely, were now full of life and laughter. They were a family, and together they would face whatever came their way. They had found something more precious than gold or silver. They had found each other.